Okay, yeah, so welcome everyone. So today is Thursday, August 20th, day 3 of KubeCon. For those of you following along with KubeCon, this is Contour office hours. So I thought was at the last community meeting, we all kind of spoke that we needed some extra time. So we'll do an hour here of the official Contour office hours, and then we can switch to the KubeCon office hours, which is at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure what that is in Central Eastern Summertime. um, So yeah, so you all wanted to talk about how to deploy Contour locally or how to debug Contour locally, right? That was
Yeah, I was
the
even
thought.
thinking, we could talk about it, and I'd be happy to kind of share screen. And since you're recording this, maybe kind of have the format where, for any new developers that want to come in, or people want to learn more about Contour, could reference this.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, maybe I could, show code. I also cloned a project called Customize
Hmm.
as well, and kind of showing what we're doing there, kind of the limited progress that we've made up to that point, if that's the correct way to do kind of local dev test for Contour. And then, the overall architecture of how kind of, just so that, people that are new to it can kind of onboard and understand it, and,
Sure.
use the right way in terms of, like, where the project's going, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Yeah, that's fine by me. Like I said, yeah, if you want to show, that's cool. If not, I can show you how I do my local dev when I work
Oh,
in Contour.
yeah. Yeah.
Either way is good with me. It doesn't matter. This is your time to hang out. So let me know. Yeah, if that works, then
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I just, I'm a happy driver or whatever. So,
yeah, go
sure.
ahead. Let's see what you have, and then we'll just go from there.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yeah, I see screen and then terminal in front of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So I've got, Contour open up in GoLand here. I thought this would be kind of a good way just to kind of quickly, see the overall kind of like folder structure, and then this project here, where, we can kind of launch it here. Anyways, yeah. So I don't really know maybe where to start. I think with Contour, so if we go into Contour, I think we can do like a make integration, right? So I think like okay, so maybe for people that are like just starting, since this is being recorded, right? So
Yeah.
essentially there are two projects, and what I did was I forked the Contour project into my own kind of repository. And then I cloned that so that we could essentially, create branches, push those branches to my repo, and then create PRs essentially, right? So kind of that standard, open source, through GitHub process there.
Yeah.
And then there's this customize project here. And Steve, is that your project? I couldn't remember who sent me that.
I know James has done some work on that. It might be James.
Yeah, I think it was James that had sent me a link. I'm trying to go through our Slack history here, but he sent me that and said, this is how I'm doing it. So essentially what he does is he creates a kind cluster, and then you can run a make integration on Contour, right? So if you look at the make file, and then you can see that there's an integration essentially step in the make file that will, build the cluster, and then essentially get Contour up and running, right? So I was going to maybe demo this real quick. And is this too small? Should I increase the size of this?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit would be great. Yeah, if your font size there.
Maybe I should just do it in here. That way I can just kind of have the same screen there.
Yeah.
Is there? Anybody know how to make that bigger?
Usually it's like Command plus. Sometimes I know in Golang I have to use like my touchpad to like pinch zoom it is how I do it in the code, but I don't know how the terminal does.
Yeah, Toronto's not doing that, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And if you could back me up on that, you try to real quick, or Kevin, if you guys want to look that up real quick. But so anyways, yeah. So maybe so I think with like kind, what is it? Kind list clusters, I think, or just maybe kind list, or kind.
Client clusters
Yeah, there we go.
list, I think, or something. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Kind.
So the one thing with make integration, so its job is to run the integration tests. So what it should do is it should spin up a kind cluster. It should build Contour and then it'll sideload those images into the cluster using the kind load image, and then it'll deploy contour and then run some integration tests against it. And then when that's done, it should destroy that cluster and go away. So there are some pieces of that you probably could use if you want to build a kind cluster, just for local dev. But the goal of that is isn't to really develop against. It's sort of a way to make running tests easier locally, I guess, the integration tests.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense then. Okay. Yeah, so then maybe that wasn't the right way to go about it. So I guess, yeah, no, I you know, so is customize the right way to, you know, to do that local development then? Is that a project that, that is typically used when people are developing on Contour, or?
So I guess what's the workflow then? Is it like make some changes in Contour, build an image, and then load that in, then push that somewhere to a registry, then re-download it in your cluster? Is that how you're working?
Yeah. So let's say that you're trying to implement some sort of like, you know, HTTP modifier, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the add remove, you know, policies, right? Where I'm trying to like add or remove a header, an HTTP header. What I would want to do as a Contour developer is say, okay, I'm going to work on this feature. I think I've got it implemented. I want to build, deploy locally, and then, you know, run an HTTP GET across the proxy, and then see if it, you know, on the other end, if that header was actually added or removed, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's a normal, what I call, like, yeah, dev workflow. So again, this can all work. So you can do that. You could, like you've done, clone Contour, make some changes, and then build an image and push that somewhere, and then re-pull that image down in your cluster and then run it. That would totally work. A way to save steps on that, if you're using kind, was instead of having to push it to registry, you could just load it in. So in kind, there's a kind load Docker image, which will basically like sideload the image into the cluster for you. So that gets around the hops of pushing it and pulling it again, which Contour is not all that large, so it shouldn't be a huge deal. But again, just other options. But still, an even faster way would be to actually run Envoy in the cluster, but run Contour locally on your machine. And that's kind of how I develop. So there's actually an example file of that. So if you go into the, yeah, so the idea there is, so this workflow with running Contour locally is you would just, again, clone the repo, make some changes, and then you would run Contour locally on your Mac or your Linux machine or whatever OS you're running. I've actually done this in WSL on Windows as well. So if someone's a Windows user, that does work. There's a couple different things to do with that, but we should document this better too, I think. So this is a great place too as well. Yeah, so if you go up to into the repo, there's an examples folder, and that's kind of where there are some different things. There's the yeah, maybe there's a good way to see it. Yeah, so there's Contour. So Contour is this Contour folder there. If you want to pin that open real quick, that directory has basically all of the deployment manifests that we use, and this is what we use to actually generate like the quick start. So down a little further, there's a render folder or directory. Basically that contour.yaml file there is all of the things in the Contour directory, all just appended together. So, but they're basically the same thing. And there's a make task for that. I think it's make generate, which will take all of the changes in that example's Contour directory and put them into the contour.yaml. Okay. And what we do as developers or as maintainers is the quick start basically points to that contour.yaml file when it gets published out to the repo. So there's like a netlify, project contour.io runs off a netlify. There's like a netlify redirect kind of script that basically points to that directory. But if you want to see all the different bits and pieces of how Contour is built, that has everything kind of busted apart, if that helps or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So again, if you wanted to change something, like if you wanted to add something to this deployment, say you, I can't think of, like you had an environment variable or something, you would go into this Contour folder, make the change there, and then you'd run make generate, and then that would basically rerun the script to then make contour.yaml basically. If you forget, there's a CI check that we have to actually look for that. So it'll yell at you if you forget that. So it's no big deal, but that's where those things come from.
Okay, so result is in the render contour.
Yeah. And then like if so, again, we can stay on task, but there's two ways I develop. So one is locally. So I'll use a kind cluster locally and then do all my local dev there. And sometimes I just need like a real load balancer or a real set of certificates, that sort of thing. So I have a cluster in AWS as well as one in GKE or Google. So in that example, when I use a cloud cluster, I'll do the workflow you described, where I'll build an image locally, I'll push it up, and then I'll go pull that image out. And what I usually do is I just go in here to the left on that contour folder, and I'll edit like the contour YAML, so the O3 contour YAML, and I'll just change the image name in there to be the one that matches me or the red image I pushed. So I don't ever use customize or any of that kind of stuff. I just go edit that file and then save it and apply it. But you could totally do that with customize, so that's an easy way to do that. Cool. But anyway, so what we're talking about was using kind, right? So I just will give you that backdrop as to how those things come together. I guess while we're here in examples, we can just walk through those. The other bits in there are example workload. I'm pointing to my screen like I can touch it. Example workload, there was a bunch of examples in there, and this is another place that we should probably expand. The goal here was to have just real working things that folks could use. So if you wanted to move from ingress to HTTP proxy, there's some examples there that show you like, here's an ingress resource, and then here's the same thing in HTTP proxy, just to help show some examples that way. We need to add some other things here, I think, which would be helpful for folks. Like gRPC comes up all the time. Folks want to have a gRPC service, and we don't have a great example of that, so we should do that. But those are just examples of things that folks can reference. So if you wanted to know how we did like inclusion or set up a TCP proxy, that sort of thing, those were examples there that you could just kube control apply.
Gotcha.
And the other bits down there, so the Grafana and Prometheus. So there's a guide on how you can pull all the metrics out of Envoy and Contour. So if you want to see things like your 200 requests and your 500 responses, or I'm sorry, 200 responses, 500 responses, how many requests per second you're pushing through envoys, that sort of thing. We have example Grafana dashboards that exist that kind of show you some generic information that you probably have to take and customize for your own. But there's a guide in the Project Contour IO site that walks through how to actually deploy Prometheus and Grafana. Again, they're just there for examples. You may have your own infrastructure for all these bits, but if you follow along, at least you can see how those will all work to pull out all the information. That's what those two do. And then kind is one I was getting to. So there's that kind directory there. So this is an example. I think I broke this last time. I should fix this. I did, but it'll still work. So this is how I develop. So when I run locally, I run a kind cluster locally on my Mac. And what this little config file does here is it will expose ports 80 in the container to your host port 80 on your local machine. It also does the same thing for 443 if you're going to run TLS. So what that means is now after you run this, it'll create a kind cluster, and because kind runs in Docker, it'll essentially give you a Docker mapping, again, from your local machine port 80 to the container port 80. And because by default, we deploy Envoy with host networking or host ports on port 80, essentially means that now once you'd run this, local host 80 on your machine will map to Envoy running in the cluster. So now what you can do is if you run, so you deploy Envoy then in the cluster, and then what we can do is we can run Contour locally, and we'll tell Envoy, instead of connecting to, we'll look at that in a second, instead of having Envoy connect to the Contour service in Kubernetes, we'll change it to be your local machine. So again, if you remember, if you're not familiar, Contour is the XDS server for Envoy. So XDS is the protocol we use to program Envoy. So it's a gRPC connection between Envoy and Contour. So there's and again, we can walk through this if you want to see that. There's a bootstrap config that we give Envoy. And it's essentially enough information to go and give you a connection back to Contour. From that point on, Contour then generates all of its configuration down to Envoy. Does this all make sense so far?
Yeah, and it's things that I've been seeing in the chat, about XDS and communicating with Envoy, which I guess is via TCP, via some sort of like protobufs, messages that you kind of pass Envoy. Is that kind of how you all the communication, and is that kind of what XDS does, or are there kind of two different layers that?
Yeah, there's all kinds of protobufs that we end up making. I mean, we can look through the code for that. But yeah, so we pull in, Envoy has a Go control plane um, project, which basically has all of the Envoy protobufs in Go files.
Okay.
So in Contour, there's basically essentially the output of what Contour does is a whole bunch of objects that match Envoy. So listeners, clusters, endpoints, secrets, that sort of thing. And then all of that gets serialized and streamed down to Envoy over that gRPC connection.
Mhm.
So if you actually go back to your examples, and right there it says o3 envoy.yaml. If you pop that one open, it's up a little more. Yeah, that one. So in here, there should be an XDS server parameter that we pass. Actually, let's look at the bootstrap first.
Okay.
So right here it says, oh, just my pipe. Yeah. So there's an init container, right? So in the Envoy daemon set, again, Envoy runs as a daemon set as the default. You could change it if you'd like, but that's just how we do it. The init container runs before all the other containers start up. So essentially, what this command, there's a command in Contour called bootstrap. And what it does is it generates some JSON, which is what Envoy will read in as it starts up. And it's enough here to tell it where things are. So you can see here we pass in the XDS address, which is Contour. So in this example, Contour matches the Contour service in that file. So if you look at O2 service Contour in that directory on the left in your tree, you'll see that that is the service that basically Kubernetes service that points to Contour. And you'll see it says XDS 8001. And that's the default port that Contour uses or exposes for Envoy to talk to it over 8001. So if you go back to the Envoy YAML file, yeah, that one, you'll see in here, we say that the address is Contour and the port's 8001. So in this example, it's going to look in Kubernetes for the Contour name, service name Contour over 8001. And then there's some certs and stuff that you can also pass. So again, by default, we secure the communication between Envoy and Contour. So that connection's encrypted. So then what that does is Envoy, when after init happens, it'll write that envoy.json file to /config, and then there's a shared volume which the Contour image, the Envoy image maps in. It should be down a little bit further. If you scroll down a little bit, or maybe it's up, whichever way. It should read in that file, and that's what Envoy uses to, excuse me, to find Contour basically. So in this example, it's going to look for it in Kubernetes, but what we want to do for kind is change it to be your local machine.
Okay. Gotcha. So, all right. So where would we update to make it our local machine? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So this is the file you do it. So what I would do is if I'm going to run this locally, I would change in this file. We can just do it here, and then you could modify or customize stuff later if you'd like. So go up to that bootstrap. Yep, and in here, so XDS address is going to be the IP of your local machine. And that won't work because that's going to be localhost in. So you think this is running in the kind cluster. So you either need your, I think there's a Docker loopback address you can use, or I just use my internal IP. If you want to share that or not, that's up to you. I don't.
I mean, it doesn't matter
if it's a big deal or not, but
yeah. So that would be like 192 address space. Right. So I guess like that, right?
Yeah, that looks about right. Okay. So yeah, grab that and put that into for the address. Yeah. So now we're telling Envoy is that when you start up, instead of looking for the Contour service in Kubernetes, we're going to look for this IP address.
Yep, makes sense.
And we can leave 8001 the same. And then what I do is I just delete the Envoy certs. So the CA file, cert file, and key file. Because when I develop locally, I don't much care about that. And it's a little trickier you'd have to pick the certs out of the Kubernetes cluster and put them locally on your machine somewhere. Yeah, right. Or do the reverse. So I just ignore it. But we'll have to change one thing there. So yeah, so at this point now, Envoy will start, and it'll look for your local machine. So if you do you have a kind cluster or not?
Yeah, I have kind installed, and I don't think I have one running. I mean, I could get one up and running real quick. I was trying to see I can't remember what state my cluster was in. So I think, was it listing my clusters and then just deleting it to create it?
Yeah, kind from scratch. Yeah, Steve posted it. I think it's kind get clusters.
Oh, thank you, Steve.
So we can just trash that, and then we'll pass in that config file.
Sure.
Just
Yeah.
do the mapping.
Yeah. So maybe we can just do like a kind delete cluster.
I think it's dash dash name equals and then that name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So now I have no kind clusters.
Cool.
Okay. So starting from scratch here.
So if you create one and then you'll have to, I don't know if you just want to go to that directory in Contour and for whatever that file is, there's that example file you could use.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have an example file of how to create a cluster.
Yeah. So that in kind, yeah, that kind exposed port. Yep.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit lost. So I don't necessarily have like a, well, okay. So kind is going to launch a Kubernetes, right? So should I just create a Kubernetes, like just kind create cluster and create a default cluster then?
Yeah. The name doesn't matter. You basically just need to say kind create cluster and you pass in dash dash config. Oh, cancel that real quick. I don't know, probably didn't finish. Yeah, and then config equals, and then you need to point to that config file.
Oh, okay.
So where, yeah.
So that would be, so it essentially runs this kind cluster. Okay, gotcha. So kind expose port. All right, all right. I gotcha. Okay, so config equals, and that's in, sorry,
You're
example.
good.
Kind expose port, right? And that's
Yeah.
gonna, okay, all right, gotcha.
And that's going to create just a one node cluster. It used to be two, and then I changed it last time, trying to get our integration test to run better. But anyway, it'll still work.
Oops, let's delete cluster. Get clusters. Okay, totally start from scratch again because I messed up.
It's all
All right,
good.
here we've got, okay, so I'm just passing dash dash config to this kind exposed port, and that's the cluster that we need. Okay, cool.
So the only gotcha here is yeah, if you have 443 or 80 already exposed, you could take out 443 if it's used up in your machine already.
So brew service. I don't stop. I don't know what I could have.
And we could pick different ports too. Again, it's just for simplicity. It's easier to use port 80 and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Just comment out the 443 maybe. It looks like it was only 443 was the issue, right?
Oh, is 443 the issue? Bind for 443 build. Okay, yeah, no, because we don't really care about the 443.
Yeah, just comment that out or delete it or whatever. Yeah, there you go. Just do it again. Yeah, and then that'll okay. It's just cooler if you don't have to use a port.
Okay, and also didn't like 80 as well.
Maybe not. Yeah.
So maybe just like all eights.
So make let's see, we want container port 80 still to match Envoy. Yeah, and then host port 880. Yeah, that'll work there, I think. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, let's try it one more time. Yeah, I've got to figure out what I got running on those ports.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. So now if you real quick do a Docker PS, what we should see is, you should have, I guess, one node. There's probably the stuff you've got running there. It's your maps. You already have it, yeah, with traffic it looks like. So not to peer through your containers, but yeah, see how port 8888 maps to port 80 in the container now? So now if you curled, localhost 8888, it would map to Envoy running in your kind cluster. It's not going to do anything because there's nothing running yet, because we haven't deployed anything into the cluster yet. Your cluster's still empty.
Yep. Okay.
But that's the idea, is how we're going to do this. So if you go ahead and you can just kube control apply. Again, this is how I do it. Again, this doesn't matter how you can. This is where customize or Helm or something like that would shine, because it would do some of this configuration for you. But where I just do it by hand out of habit, I would just go ahead and kube control apply the examples folder in the Contour repo.
Okay. All right. So So K control I. Okay, so this is going to be in the examples. Okay, so I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head a little bit around.
Mm-hmm.
So I created just a default kind cluster, and I passed this as a config,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially. So now I really don't understand what this did right here, right? Now I see that like the output talks about the control plane here, where it says, oh, I thought it said something about a control plane. But anyways, yeah. So I really don't understand kind of what this config did and what changes are different as opposed to like just creating a regular, like what did this config file do to our kind cluster?
Yeah,
Essentially.
so you can create multi-node clusters with kind. So by default, when you say kind create cluster, you'll get a single cluster or single node cluster, and it doesn't map any ports to your machine, so it's just a generic cluster. What this is doing is this is actually extending that and saying, right, I still want a one node cluster, but I want to map ports from my local machine into that cluster. And what this is going to let us do is once we deploy some workloads to this cluster, we'll be able to curl from our local machine and then test to see what the result is in Contour or Envoy.
Okay,
Um,
so now this may be a bad analogy, but this is kind of like a load balancer essentially. Is this the way where we are exposing a port, binding on our local machine? If we didn't run this config file,
mhm.
essentially, we wouldn't be able to curl into our kind cluster, right?
Right, you'd have to like port forward first into it to get to it.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Now there is an example out on the. It should still work. I contributed this a while ago. On the, I think you had the kind docs up. If you want to pop there real quick, just for fun, out in your browser, there's the kind documentation. Yeah, on the left there, if you go over to, there should be an ingress on the home. Yeah, right in the middle of that first bullet under. Yeah. So this shows you how to. There's an option for contour there. So what this does is this lets you deploy basically a multi-node cluster. So say you needed more capacity in your cluster than just one node. This walks you through basically how to apply multiple machines. So, but because we are binding to host ports, you can only do that once, right? So think about it. If you had four nodes in your cluster running in kind, that equates to 4 different containers running in Docker. You can't bind all 4 to port 80, right? You get an error. So what this config does is we're basically patching the daemon set to make only one of them run on a node, I guess. But what this does is this lets you have more capacity in your cluster if you needed it. Like say you had to run a whole bunch of stuff on your machine to run whatever test you're trying to run. This basically let you have multiple nodes is all this is doing. I think at the top they show you how to make the config file does multiple nodes, I guess. Up here, yeah. So see that create cluster go down just a little bit. Right here, you'll see this one and see it has control plane and then add some more configuration files. It is still only one node. It used to be multi-node, but you could add more nodes here if you wanted to. So see, it says roles control plane. You can actually create HA clusters in kind. You could add more worker nodes to it. I'm just saying that just to explain what this config file does.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's good. So in other words, how we establish our kind cluster, we have options in terms of what we need to test while we're developing Contour. So if we need to deploy more nodes or anything, for example, then this is how we would go about doing that essentially,
yep.
right?
And I think you could apply the same with Minikube. I think Minikube has a way to expose ports. Even if you wanted to run, like I've done this in AWS, where I had a cluster running in AWS and I had one of those tunneling software things. I mean, like Alex Ellis has inlets where it'll tunnel a port in. You could use that sort of thing as well. Again, I'm breaking across subjects now, but all we want to do is have Envoy running in some cluster somewhere and then have a way for that Envoy to find us back here on our machine is what we need to do. So yeah, so cool. So now you have a kind cluster running, so we need to go deploy Contour and Envoy.
Okay.
Is there next? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I don't want to jump ahead.
Cool.
The
Yeah,
config file.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think getting this from the very beginning and be able to kind of get some of those like, like questions out of the way,
Yeah.
totally is the framework here. So, okay, so
Okay.
we've got a kind cluster that we started with just this nice little, file that was provided in our repo here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're exposed on port 888 that maps to 80, but this doesn't map to necessarily any sort of service or pod. It's just essentially saying bind to Well, I guess, yeah. So it says container port, right? So I guess, it's going to the control plane in the cluster, right? So it's essentially saying, yeah. Well, okay. So I guess I don't really understand like maybe how some of the routing, internal routing, but what I do understand is that our kind cluster now has port 88888. So if we curl that, it takes the traffic into our kind cluster, right? Now how it gets routed to like a service or whatever, I'm not real sure of right now. So,
Yes. Yeah, no, so it's getting to Envoy through port 80 because Envoy by default is binding to host port 80. So go to your, in the left there, examples, it's O2 service Envoy. Yeah, and in here that we should see that we have, where's the, oh, it's in the deployment. I'm sorry. Go to O3 Envoy. Not the service. It's the last one, yeah. So in here, wherever port 80 and 443 are defined, you should see it should say host port. There we go. So see how this is the default daemon set for Envoy. So it's going to map to host ports 80 and 443. So essentially, because you've mapped Docker to port 80 in the cluster, Envoy is then going to bind to port 80 on that node, and then expose it that way. You could do this too. So if you created, say in that service Envoy, you could create a static node port, say 30,005, if you wanted to, and you could map 8888 to 30,005, and that would then target the node port of the cluster. And that's how you can get into Envoy. We're just trying to get a cheap, easy way to get to Envoy is what we're trying to get to here.
yep. So this is essentially like any other pod, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where this is our O3 Envoy is our daemon set, essentially deployment, descriptor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is just the service, and this is just like any other sort of like Kubernetes pod or service or daemon set deployment, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Just
and
using,
that kind of, go ahead.
Just using the Envoy images, right? So it's just pulling them from the Docker Hub. Yep. Or
yep.
no, so, that's the contour. Wait, do we have two deployments in this?
There's actually three things in here. Yeah, there's an init container, there's the shutdown manager, and then there's Envoy. So Envoy should be, yeah, there's the upstream, just generic image. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Specifying the version here. Okay, 115. And then on this one, so are we deploying Contour as well with this Envoy deployment?
Yeah, so Envoy, the Envoy daemon set has two containers. Well, three technically, I guess. So the first container that gets run is the init container. And that's what creates that bootstrap configuration. Right, and that's that one. And these all use master because we're on the main branch of, you might not have updated. We changed it all to main, I believe. So we're on the root of Contour's repo. So this isn't a versioned release. Normally these would all be versioned.
Okay.
So the init container does the bootstrapping. And then the other container in there is Envoy, which we just saw, right? So that actually runs Envoy. And then the third piece in there is this thing called the shutdown manager, which is a whole other thing we could talk about. But its job is to help you if you need to change Envoy, like say you need to roll out a new version or you need to take a node out of service in your cluster. Essentially, there's traffic routing through that Envoy, presumably, right? Routing lots of traffic. But you want a way to take that node out of service so it doesn't get new traffic, but also let it complete all the in-flight requests, all the open connections that are still on there. So the job of that shutdown manager is to gracefully shut down Envoy and tell it to stop accepting connections, and then allow a wait time for it to actually drain all the connections out. So then you can terminate that instance without dropping connections to your users. That's the goal of that pod or that container. But for now, if we're doing this, it won't matter. It's not going to matter. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So now I just need to do a kube control apply examples, and I guess, are we wanting to apply one by one, or do we just want to apply the render?
We'll do the one for the contour folder, because I think we changed we took out the certs.
Gotcha.
And we put your IP in that one, so let's just do that one.
So do I want to do the Envoy first and then the service, or do I want to start with? I mean, I guess I have to create my namespaces, right, and stuff like that. Or?
You can just apply the directory if you want. It's all in there.
Just like that.
Yeah, just do that one, and then we can delete. Just go ahead and do that one. Again, this is how I do it. Again, you could do it better with Customize, I think. Essentially, what we want is we want everything but contour. right? So this is going to deploy contour. So if you want, you could go kube control delete contour, or what I do, I just scale the deployment to 0. But it's not really in play because we've told Envoy now to look for your local machine. So even if it's running in the cluster, it's not really not going to matter because it's not in use. No one's looking for it.
Oh, gotcha. Because
Do you know what I mean?
we're going to be running it locally, so our traffic's going to go to our local, not the contour that's deployed in kind, right?
Right. Right. So yeah. So
it won't even be used, right?
yeah. So if you go ahead and do kube control get pods in a namespace project contour, that's the default that it gets deployed to. You should see we have 2 instances of contour. Again, that's the default because we make two replicas of that. There's the cert gen which ran, but again, it's not needed because we took out the certs. So again, that's just a no op work, but I'm just showing you how I do it. And then there's Envoy, right? And you can see it says 1 of 2 running. So Envoy itself has an internal health check that we expose as a liveliness probe. So if Envoy doesn't connect to contour, it's not really healthy yet, right? Because it hasn't gotten all its configuration. So it's actually not healthy. So this is good too. So in a perfect world, this won't get traffic from the external, from anything external if this was a production cluster. And it's waiting because you don't have contour running locally on your machine. That's why it's sort of hanging. And we could tell the logs, you'd see it looking for that. Now, I guess in here, there's the 2 contour pods and that search gen are just not needed. Now, they're not in play, but you don't really need them if it's confusing. But this is where customize could shine, right? All you really want to deploy is the CRDs, the namespace, the Envoy pod, that sort of stuff. But for me, like I just deploy it all and just ignore the rest, I guess, if that makes sense. Because whatever, you know. Is this clear? I guess, is that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think once I get contour kind of running locally, because one thing, so from my understanding, right, is that if I run contour locally, we run the XDS gRPC on like, what was it, port like 4001 or something like that? And
8001, yeah.
Oh, 8001, right. And we're not exposing that in the cluster. So, right, so like the cluster, so we've exposed port 8888, it should be 80, right? But we just had to change that port, right? So exposing the HTTP port on 8888, but how is my local contour able to connect and do the gRPC communication with Envoy if 8001 is not like exposed, if that makes sense?
Right, yeah, sure, yeah. So right now we have Envoy running, but there's no contour running. So Envoy's not getting any configuration. So in chat, I just posted, this is the command that I use to run and test locally. If you want to grab that, and we can paste that, and I can show you what I do. So I guess so everyone can see. So what I in the Zoom chat there, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put that here. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So you run a make install, and then you run contour, right? So let's see.
Yeah. So the make install will actually do a go install. It'll build contour and put it in your local go bin, and then we'll run a contour serve. So contour serve is the command used to actually serve the XDS server. So you've seen like contour bootstrap. We saw like the contour envoy shutdown manager, which is a different command. This one is actually what's used to serve up this is the meat and potatoes of contour. And what we're giving it is basically, by default, I think it'll look at your home kube config. I think I just passed it because I had some other clusters running. But we're telling contour how to configure some stuff. So we're saying, hey, contour, the Kubernetes cluster that connect to, you have to give it a kube config because it doesn't have, you're not running inside the cluster. And then we're telling it, hey, the XDS address is 0000. You could customize that if you wanted to. And the important bit here is we have, -- insecure. Because by default, contour won't run without certificates unless you force it to say, hey, go run insecure. Again, this is just to be secure first. So we took the certs out of the Envoy daemon set running in your kind cluster. So now we're just going to basically tell contour, hey, ignore certs. We're just going to run without them. And then the other 2 pieces are, and then all this stuff maps up to the the contour deployment in the examples there. But we're going to configure the Envoy ports. So by default, the Envoy will expose its listeners on port 8080 and 8443. We want to change that to be 80 and 443. And again, this is what's mapping to our cluster. So our kind cluster is expecting the host port to be 80. So you still want to keep that 80 though.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So basically what this is going to do is, and we can look at that, but Contour is going to configure 2 listeners depending on what you have set up. So when you create some sort of ingress object, Contour will configure Envoy to have an HTTP listener, right? That's how it's going to accept, insecure traffic. As soon as you create some sort of resource that has a cert attached to it, which means TLS, it'll then spin up the TLS listener. And then this is configuring what ports that should use. So you may, like if you had a cloud environment where you had some sort of external load balancer, 80 and 443 don't matter as much because it could be, 8080 or 8443, that sort of thing. But if you don't set these, I guess, it'll use the defaults, which won't map to our examples that we have set up here. Cool. So if you go ahead and hit enter on that, this hopefully, if everything works on your machine, it'll install. What's that?
Oh, so it does the make install. So does this put this in my path, right, for like my executable path?
Yeah, assuming assuming you have your Go stuff set up properly.
Okay. Yeah, that's a bit of a leap. I think I had some issues with Go. I may just have to update, but I don't know. I think we may have fixed that. I was having some issues with like Go root and Go path and getting those.
Well, we can see real quick. It'll tell us pretty quick here if it's gonna.
Command not found. So did it actually install Contour into my path there?
I'm thinking it didn't. So do you have? Can you just echo your $Go path, or do you have that set up? Yeah. .go. So then it should be in .go/bin, I think.
Oh, okay. So then I don't have. Okay, so let's try that maybe. So
yeah, there it is. Cool. So now if you can just do that contour serve command, and then just take out the make install, and then yeah. I'll have to explain it. You know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So like this. Okay.
I think you just need to add that bin to your path, and then that'll work the same. Cool. So now if you hit enter, this will actually go and run Contour. So now you're running Contour locally on your machine. And then here, right there, those 2 messages, just from habit, that's Envoy connecting to your instance of Contour. So if you had a new tab in your terminal, if you did a get pods in the namespace project Contour again, you should see that the Envoy went healthy. Okay. Or it should went 2 of 2 because it's now connected.
Gotcha. Okay, so maybe if I just do like get now what do I want to get here? Do I want to get the pods?
Yeah, pods in yeah.
Oops.
There you go. And now see how Envoy is 2 of 2 was because now your Contour is running and it has configuration. So the last missing bit that we don't have is any workloads. So again, if you want to follow what I do just for fun, if you do a kube control apply, if you're in the Contour repo, yeah, you can do apply. And there's, if you go site/examples/proxy demo, I think, yeah. So there's a, you can just apply the whole thing. There's a blog post that I have that I wrote that walks through how to do includes and stuff. It kind of introduces HTTP proxy. Again, I just use this because it gives you a bunch of things real quick just to play around with. So if you just apply this, it went and create a whole bunch of things. So go ahead and do a kube control get proxy-A or space-A, yeah.
Space-.
Yeah, so that gets all proxies and all namespaces is what that's doing. So you can see this deployed. It deployed some sample workload on your cluster. But I guess the important bit I want to get to is see how the FQDN is local.projectcontour.io. What we've set up is we've set up that DNS name to point back to localhost. So basically because Contour is an L7 load balancer, you need to pass it a name. It's difficult to route against IP addresses.
Yep.
So by default now, at this point, if you curl localhost project Contour :8888, you should get a response from something.
Localhost.
Local.projectcontour.io.
Oh, but okay, but is it going to resolve that?
It should, because that's a public thing that we've set up. Yeah, there you go. And that worked again because 8888 is mapped to port 80 in your kind cluster. which then Envoy maps to host ports, which then resolve the request. If you curl just localhost 8888, you could do that, but you should get a 404 from Envoy, because what that means is Envoy got a request for localhost and it doesn't have any vhosts that match that. If you do a curl-i, you should get like a 404 from Envoy. Yeah, so because there's no FQDN matching localhost. Now you could change the proxy config to be localhost for the FQDN, and then that would work.
Okay.
And then you can use whatever you want, obviously. That's just a simple thing without having to mess around with your host file on your local machine or set up some of those like no IP URL shortener things. But again, however you want to get that, that's up to y'all how you want to do that. So at this point now, you've got Contour running, right? So you could go ahead and make a change to Contour. So if you go back to your other window, yeah, you could go ahead and code up whatever you want to do, and then just do the same command again.
So kill this, rerun it. Well, I would need to make it, right? I do a make install.
You'd have to rebuild it, yeah, right,
Yeah,
right.
so
So it looks like Steve says, what do you run? You say go run /command Contour. Okay.
Yes, basically just instead of running make install, go run, I'll just basically build and run it locally. Okay. So it, effectively the same thing, but doesn't require depending on the go path and the bin directory within there.
Yeah, so that's actually cool, yeah. I think before we couldn't do that for some reason. I thought there was something, I don't know, or it's just channeling my inner Dave Cheney. He always did it that way, so that's how I did it, I guess.
So that would be something like, we'll go CMD Contour. Yeah. That.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's essentially just using Go to just essentially run the Go files themselves, right? So it's a kind of like more direct way to run.
Right. It doesn't doesn't build and drop a binary anywhere on your local file system.
Okay, cool. Now, it doesn't have like restart listener, does it? So like if I make a change to a file, it doesn't like, so I'd have to kill it and restart it manually essentially.
Yeah, you'd have to do that.
But so then what happens is then Envoy will reconnect, right? And then it will download its new config. So it should just update properly. So the idea here is then this shortens your workflow, right? So you can now like make a change to Contour, do that command there, and then boom, you can test it again really quickly without having to build an image, push the image, pull it, kill the pod, do that whole loop.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Just kind of faster, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so. I mean, we're up and running at this point, right now.
Yep.
How do you like test HTTP? Like, do you use like HTTP bin? So would I deploy HTTP bin like in my kind cluster by using kubectl, like with a service and a pod, some sort of deploy something like HTTP bin, and then I'd be able to route and proxy and create an HTTP proxy and all that stuff in my kind cluster? Is that kind of how the?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. At this point, you can do it. If you've got a full cluster running, you can have any kind of routing you like. It's just you just need to have a way for your local Mac to find that kind cluster now, which is over localhost 8888. You just have to have a DNS name map to Contour. I'm sorry, to Envoy in that cluster. So the example we deployed was local.projectcontour.io, which we've set up as responding to to localhost. So you'll have to have just a way to target and have your Mac route to that, I guess.
Yeah, and that's kind of actually what confuses me a little bit, right? So when I curled here, right? So this resolves to like if I just say if I were to just like ping this or whatever, right? So it resolves to my local.
Yep.
I'm confused about how it does that. So
So we've just configured that out in our DNS hosts because CNCF now owns projectcontour.io, the website.
Oh, so you guys configured to resolve this to 127.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. And that was to make our examples kind of work easier. So the idea is that you could, if you follow along what we just did, all these examples should work really easily on your local machine without having you to set up. I used to have folks set up or modify their local Etsy host file.
Yes, right.
And muck around with that. And sometimes that gets tricky because you need like sudo apps, sudo rights, and that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
This way you don't have to deal with all that. Yeah. So you can use this if you like, but you don't have to.
Yeah,
this is what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think so. This is really helpful, and I know we've taken kind of the whole hour here, and gosh, there's a lot that goes on with all of this. I mean, this is a really cool project. But I think a couple things that might stick out in my mind, and maybe I'm just bringing up some good points so that I can make sure you guys can wrap by too, right, to get to your KubeCon stuff. But like that gRPC, I'm still not totally sure on like how that relationship between Envoy and Contour, right? So I stood up the kind cluster, I passed it that config, which gave us an exposed port to the kind cluster's control plane. Then we did an apply, which essentially deployed Envoy and Contour from the examples folder here, right? So
Yep.
got this Contour folder. I then applied this. It applied all of these manifests to the kind cluster, but we're essentially ignoring this and this, right? I'm still not too sure how my local Contour does the RPC with Envoy with 8001. If all I did was configure for 8888, I'm not too sure how that happens. Like, how's 8001 exposed in my kind cluster so that Envoy can actually receive those gRPC messages? So, if that makes sense, I don't.
Yeah, so Envoy and Contour are talking over gRPC. So in that, go to open up that O3 Envoy you have highlighted right now. Yeah, so in here we customize the bootstrap config. So go up to that bootstrap.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so here, so this is the bootstrap. So this is what Envoy reads the first time. So when Envoy starts up, it reads in this config file, this /config envoy.json. And what we told it was, hey, your XDS address, meaning where Contour is located, is at that IP address, that 192.168.1.187. So Envoy is going to look to that IP address in that port for its XDS server, which is running over gRPC. So in your terminal, when you did that you did the go run, command contour serve, that command, that's actually started up the server end of that address, right? So on your local machine, which is running on 192.168.1.187, when you run that contour serve command, it's actually starting that XDS server on port 8001. So then once that's running, then Envoy just connects to that. So from inside the kind cluster, it went and talked to your local machine for its XDS server.
Okay, so Contour is actually running the gRPC server, and Envoy is making the requests into Contour.
Yep. So yeah, so Envoy is really dumb. It has no configuration short of what's in that bootstrap config. All of the logic is in Contour. So we have to give Envoy just enough information basically to find Contour. Once it has that, then Contour will stream down the rest of the configuration over that gRPC connection. But this is kind of the minimum information that Envoy needs to get running.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think I've got enough to chew on, Steve. I want to give an opportunity for anybody else. I know we've got a few other folks, to talk. I really appreciate this, and didn't want to take up the whole hour, but I hope this is beneficial for, people. But
I think this is great. This comes up a lot, and I hope this can help speed up your workflows as well. Because I know I used to push images all day long, and when you do a lot of changes over and over, it can take a while.
It would be brutal, right? To have a workflow like that.
So yeah, so this works totally fine, and this can work anywhere too. So if you had, I've had clusters running, on a vSphere instance I had in my house here that I did the same thing. It just doesn't matter, I guess, how Envoy is running, as long as it's running in a Kubernetes cluster for you to test things. That's the important bit. So you just got to have basically, Envoy find Contour. So
is Envoy in like when you deploy this on Kubernetes using the examples that are on like the website and stuff, is Envoy pretty much have the same configuration here? You just have this envoy.json. And where is that envoy.json, by the way? Is it somewhere in here? Does it get like volume mounted or something, like the envoy?
Yeah, so that init container generates it. So that bootstrap command here will actually go and build that out. So in Contour, we have a command that will generate that JSON file.
Okay.
And then it gets written to that /config directory, which is just a shared directory inside that pod.
Gotcha. Okay. One thing too that's a little confusing for me. Again, I'm just there's probably a lot of things that are confusing. Is like how the Envoy service in the kind cluster knows anything about this IP address, right? Like if it's running inside of its own, I guess, kind of bridge network, in the cluster, how is it able to connect to my local environment? Is it on the same, network essentially that it can even communicate with Contour. That's probably something I'm not too sure about there. But
That's just this Docker, I think. I'm not sure if there's.
Okay.
I think you can create networks in Docker, but I think out of the box,
Gotcha.
if it can't find the IP locally, it's just going to go out to your local machine and go look for that. And that's why I said like that XDS address. I've done this before where I've run Envoy in like my AWS cluster, and I've run Contour locally on my machine. And there's some tools out there like ngrok and I guess the inlets from Alex Ellis. Some of those tools will basically map an application locally on your machine through an external resource, right? So basically makes your local machine exposed to the internet. Yep. So in that scenario, this IP address could be, a domain that points to my local machine, but coming from the cloud somewhere else in the world, you know what I mean? Yeah. Which is really scary in a way, but but it's totally possible. The idea is just need to connect them together. However that works, that's the goal, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Steve. I know we're wrapping up on time, and I'll definitely hit you guys up on Slack as I kind of am working through this. Hold on, sorry, Alexa. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Yeah.
But yeah. But I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. I hope this helps. Yeah, hit us up on Slack. Yeah, so I think we're out of time for this hour. So we're going to switch now to the CNCF or the KubeCon office hours. I'm not sure. Steve, do you have a link for that or anything?
I gotta go find it.
Okay. If not, yeah, I'll just end this here and then we can, I think it's in the expo hall.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I got to bounce.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chad. So we'll go to that one next. If you want to start any other questions, happy to chat more about all this stuff. Okay.